Welcome back. I did charge the camcorder a little bit more. Let's get something to drink. I start to get tired. It's a bit hot in my apartment. Just eat the last candy. I had a little bit candy left. This one, Candy King. That was a bag of candy. Candy King. Yes. I think I have to reboot my computer, but I have to do this later. I think one of this old cheap Acer Aspire. This is old. That's a Pentium D. I think it's a Pentium dual core. I'm not sure. This is old Intel Core i5 first generation. That's old i3 fourth generation. But I think this is a Pentium D or Pentium dual core. I think the Pentium dual core is from around 2007. And Pentium D is a little bit older, 2006. Yes, we could put the video public. No, they're not ready. Let's do it later. So that's Pentium D and Pentium dual core. And then a long weird list of Pentium names. Maybe read that too. Yes. I think we can keep this one-part video. Yes, I can see this Pentium is from May 2005. Yes, I need half a minute to go to my bed and do myself ready. So when I'm looking this Danish second-hand papers and I'm looking from the old gamer computers, that's some I will find Pentium D and Pentium dual core. But the Pentium D and Pentium dual core can run the Windows 10 because Pentium D have this XD bit or ND bits, and it got something called PAT and SSE2. They got something you need to run the Windows 10. So, but let's start to get tired. Let's read.
Pentium D. Pentium D Intel Pentium D logo.png. Logo as of 2006. General information launched May 25, 2005. Discontinued July 13, 2010. 1. Common manufacturer, S. Intel. Performance max. CPU clock rate 2.66 GHz to 3.73 GHz. FSB speeds 533 mount /s to 1066 mount /s. Architecture and classification technology node 90 nm to 65 microarchitecture. Net burst instruction set MMX. SSE, SSE2, SSE3 and x86-64 physical specifications. Cores 2.2.1. Socket, S, LGA 775. Products, models, variants. Core name, S, Smithfield Pressler. History: predecessor Pentium 4, successor Pentium Dual. Pentium D2 is a range of desktop 64-bit x86-64 processors based on the NetBurst microarchitecture, which is the dual-core variant of the Pentium 4 manufactured by Intel. Each CPU comprised 2 DIs, each containing a single core, residing next to each other on a multi-chip module package. The brand's first processor, codenamed Smithfield and manufactured on the 90nm process, was released on the 25th of May, 2005, followed by the 65nm Pressler 9 months later. 3. By 2004, the NetBurst processors reached a clock speed barrier at 3.8 GHz due to a thermal and power limit exemplified by the Pressler's 130-watt thermal design power. 4. A higher TDP requires additional cooling that can be prohibitively noisy or expensive. The future belonged to more energy-efficient and slower clockage core CPUs on a single die instead of 2.5. However, the Pentium D did not offer significant upgrades in design. 6. Still resulting in relatively high power consumption. 4. The final shipment date of the dual-die Pressler chips was August 8, 2008. 7. Which marked the end of the Pentium D brand and also the NetBurst microarchitecture. The Pentium D line was removed from the official price lists on the 13th of July, 2010. Contents: Pentium D /Extreme Edition Smithfield. Smithfield XE. Pressler. Pressler XE. Successor. Implementation. Comparison to Athlon 64X2. Comparison to Pentium Dual Core. See also. References. External links. Pentium D / Extreme Edition. Core 2. Pentium D 933.00 GHz. Pressler. With Intel i945GC chipset, the dual-core CPU is capable of running multi-threaded applications typical in transcoding of audio and video, compressing, photo and video editing and rendering, and ray tracing. Single-threaded applications, including most older games, do not benefit much from a second core compared to an equally clocked single-core CPU. Nevertheless, the dual-core CPU is useful to run both the client and server processes of a game without noticeable lag in either thread, as each instance could be running on a different core. Furthermore, multi-threaded games benefit from dual-core CPUs. In 2008, many business applications were not optimized for multiple cores. They ran at similar speed when not multitasking on the Pentium D or older Pentium 4 branded CPUs at the same clock speed. However, in multitasking environments such as BSD, Linux, Microsoft Windows operating systems, other processes are often running at the same time. If they require significant CPU time, each core of the Pentium D branded processor can handle different programs, improving overall processing speed over its single-core Pentium 4 counterpart. Intel Pentium D Processor Family 2005-2006. Logo 2006-2008. Logo Desktop Codename ED Manufacturing Process Date Released Pentium D Logo as of 2005. Pentium D Logo as of 2006. Smithfield Pressler 90nm 65nm May 2005 Jan 2006 Original Pentium Extreme Edition Logo. Pentium Extreme Edition Logo as of 2006. Smithfield XE Pressler XE 90nm 65nm May 2005 Jan 2006 List of Intel Pentium D processors. Smithfield. In April 2005, Intel's biggest rival, AMD, had x86 dual-core processors intended for workstations and servers on the market, and was poised to launch a comparable product intended for desktop computers. ASA response: Intel developed Smithfield, the first x86 dual-core processor intended for desktop computers, beating AMD's Athlon 64X2 by a few weeks. Intel first launched Smithfield on the 16th of April 2005 in the form of the 3.2 GHz hyper-threading-enabled Pentium Extreme Edition 840. On the 26th of May 2005, Intel launched its mainstream Pentium D branded processor lineup with initial clock speeds of 2.8, 3.0, and 3.2 GHz with model numbers of 820, 830, and 840 respectively. In March 2006, Intel launched the last Smithfield processor, the entry-level Pentium D805, clocked at 2.66 GHz with a 533 mount /S bus. The relatively cheap underside of a Pentium D820,805 was found to be highly overclockable. 3.5 GHz was often possible with good air cooling. Running it at over 4 GHz was possible with water cooling, and at this speed the 805 outperformed the top-of-the-line processors. May 2006, from both major CPU manufacturers, the AMD Athlon 64FX60 and Intel Pentium Extreme Edition 965, in many benchmarks including power consumption. 8. The 805 and 820 models had a 95 watt TDP. All other models were rated at 130 watt. All Smithfield processors were made of 290 nm Prescott cores, next to each other on a single die with 1 MB of level 2, L2, cache per core. Hyper-threading was disabled in all Pentium D8XX series Smithfields with the exception of the Pentium Extreme Edition 840. Smithfield did no support Intel VTX. Intel's x86 virtualization, formerly Vanderpool. All Pentium D processors supported Intel 64, formerly M64T, XD-bit, and were manufactured for the LGA 775 form factor. The only motherboards guaranteed to work with the Pentium D and Extreme Edition branded CPUs were those based on the 945, 955, 965 and 975 series Intel chipsets, as well as Enforce 4 SLI Intel Edition and ATI Radeon Express. The Pentium D820 did not work with the Enforce 4 SLI Intel Edition chipset due to some power design issues, though they were rectified in the X16 version. The 915 and 925 series chipsets did not work at all with the Smithfields, as they did not support more than one core, to prevent manufacturers making a cheap dual CPU motherboard capable of supporting XPUs, as had happened with the 875p chipset. The 865 and 875 series chipsets supported multiprocessing. Motherboards with them might be Pentium D compatible with an updated BIOS. A week after its launch, Intel officially denied a report, 9, in Computer World Today Australia that the Pentium D branded CPUs included secret digital rights management features in their hardware that could be utilized by Microsoft Windows and other operating systems, but was not publicly disclosed. While Intel admitted that there were some DRM technologies in the 945 and 955 series chipsets, it stated that the treatment of the technologies was exaggerated, and that the technologies in question had been present in Intel's chipsets since the 875p. Smithfield XE. The Pentium Extreme Edition, PXE, was introduced at the Spring 2005 Intel Developers Forum, not to be confused with the Pentium 4 Extreme Edition, an earlier, single-core processor occupying the same niche. The processor was based on the dual-core Pentium D branded Smithfield, but with hyper-threading enabled, thus any operating system saw 4 logical processors. It also had an unlocked multiplier to allow for easier overclocking. It was initially released as Intel Pentium Extreme Edition 840 at 3.20 GHz in early 2005, at a price point of $999.99, OEM price, or $1,200, retail. The only chipsets that worked with the Extreme Edition 840 were Intel's 955X, NVIDIA's Enforce 4 SLI Intel Edition, and AT Radeon Express 200. Using a Pentium Extreme Edition branded CPU with an Intel 945 series chipset will disable hyperthreading. Pressler. The last generation of Pentium D branded processors was Pressler released on the 16th of January, 2006, identified by the product code 80553, and made of 265nm process cores found also in Pentium 4 branded Cedar Mill CPUs. Pressler introduced the multi-chip module, or MCM, which consisted of 2 single-core DIs placed next to each other on the same substrate package. This allowed Intel to produce these processors at a Intel Pentium D933.00 GHz on an Intel D945 GCCR motherboard reduced production cost as a result of higher yields. Pressler was supported by the same chipsets as Smithfield. It was produced using 65nm technology similar to Yona. Pressler communicated with the system using an 800 mount/SFSB, and its 2 cores communicated also using the FSB, just as in Smithfield. Pressler also included Intel Tex, formerly Vanderpool, although this was limited to the 9X0 models, and not in the 9X5 models Intel 64, XD-bit, and EIST, Enhanced Intel SpeedStep technology. Pressler was released in the first quarter of 2006 with a 2x2 MB Level 2 cache. Its models included 915, 920, 925, 930, 935, 940, 945, 950 and 960, with our respective 2.8, 2.8, 3.0, 30, 3.2, 3.2, 3.4, 3.4, and 3.6 GHz clock frequency. All steppings of Pressler models 915, 920, 925, 930, and 935, as well as the C1, D0 steppings of 940, 945 featured a 95-watt TDP. All other models, i.e. certain models with 3.2 GHz or faster clock frequencies, were rated at 130 watt, a 37% increase in power consumption. 10. The first batch of Pressler processors, revision B1, had the EIS feature turned off by a microcode update because of stability issues. That affected only its power consumption, when idle, and thermal dissipation. Chips with working EIS started shipping in Q2 2006. They had a different S-spec number which can be found in Intel IRATA documentation. Pressler XE. The Pentium Extreme Edition based on the dual-core Pentium D branded Pressler was introduced as the 955 model, at 3.46 GHz, and used a 1066 mount/SFSB compared to the 800 mount/S in the non-Extreme Edition. A second version, The 965 at 3.73 GHz followed in March 2006. Both CPUs also feature hyper-threading technology and an unlocked multiplier. Overclockers have been able to overclock the core to 4.26 GHz using air cooling simply by raising the unlocked CPU multiplier. The Pressler Extreme Edition was intended to only be combined with the Intel 975X chipset. It could also work with the 955X chipset, though this combination was not supported by Intel. The i975X featured the ICH7R South Bridge and supported all LGA 775, Socket T, Pentium 4, Pentium D, and Pentium Extreme Edition branded processors. Successor. The Pentium D brand was merged with the Pentium 4 brand and succeeded on the 27th of July, 2006. By the Core 2 branded line of processors with the Core microarchitecture released as dual and quad-core processors branded Duo, Quad, and Extreme. Implementation. In a single processor scenario, the CPU to North Bridge link is point-to-point and the only real requirement is that it is fast enough to keep the CPU fed with data from memory. When assessing the Pentium D, it is important to note that it is essentially two CPUs in the same package and that it will face the same bus contention issues as a pair of Xeons prior to the dual independent BIS architecture introduced with the dual-core Dempsey Xeons. To use a crude analogy, one could say that instead of using a single cable between CPU and North Bridge, one must use a Y-splitter. Leaving aside advanced issues such as cache coherency, each core can only use half of the 800 mount /SFSB bandwidth when under heavy load. Comparison to Athlon 64X2. The competing AMD Athlon 64X2, although running at lower clock rates and lacking hyper-threading, had some significant advantages over the Pentium D, such as an integrated memory controller, a high-speed hyper-transport bus, a shorter pipeline, 12 stages compared to the Pentium DS31, and better floating point performance, 11, more than offsetting the difference in raw clock speed. Also, while the Athlon 64X2 inherited mature multi-core control logic from the multi-core Optron, the Pentium D was seemingly rushed to production and essentially consisted of two CPUs in the same package. Indeed, shortly after the launch of the mainstream Pentium D branded processors, the 26th of May, 2005, and the Athlon 64X2, 31 May 2005, a consensus arose that AMD's implementation of multi-core was superior to that of the Pentium D.12, 13. As a result of this and other factors, AMD surpassed Intel in desktop PC sales at US retail stores for a period of time, although Intel retained overall market leadership because of its exclusive relationships with direct sellers such as Dell. 14. Comparison to Pentium. Dual core. In 2007, Intel released a new line of desktop processors under the brand Pentium Dual Core, using the Core microarchitecture, which was based upon the Pentium M architecture, which was itself based upon the Pentium 3. The newer Pentium Dual Core processors give off considerably less heat, 65 watt max, than the Pentium D, 95 or 130 watt max. They also run at lower clock rates, only have up to 2 MB L2 cache memory while the Pentium D has up to 2 MB, and they lack hyper-threading. The Pentium Dual Core has a wider execution unit, 4 issues wide compared to the Pentium DS3, and its 14 stages long pipeline is less than half the length of the Pentium DS, allowing it to outperform the Pentium D in most applications despite having lower clock speeds and less L2 cache memory. See also. List of Intel